Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Givaradhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Shila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Shila Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. We're going to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, verse 14. And the name of the chapter is the Further Inquiries by Vidura. Asesha saklesha samam vidhate Gunanuvada shravana murareh Kimya punastach charanaravindam Paraga sevaratiratmalabham Asesha saklesha samam vidhate Gunanuvada shravana murareh Kim va purastach charanaravindam Paraga sevaratiratmalabham Asesha, unlimited. Saklesha, miserable conditions. Samam, cessation. Vidhate, can perform. Guna anuvada, of the transcendental name, form, qualities, pastimes, entourage, and paraphernalia. Qualities, pastimes, entourage, and paraphernalia. Shravanam, hearing and chanting. Murare, of Murari, Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. Kimya, what to speak of. Punah, again. Tat, his. Charana Aravindam, lotus feet. Paragaseva, to the service of the flavorful dust. Rati, attraction. Atmalabha, those who have gained such achievement. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Simply by chanting and hearing of the transcendental name, form, etc. of the personality of Godhead Shri Krishna, one can achieve the cessation of unlimited miserable conditions. Therefore, what to speak of those who have attained attraction for serving the flavor of the dust of the Lord Lotus feet? Purport. Two different methods for controlling the material senses are recommended in the Vedic scriptural wisdom. One of them is the process of jnana, or the path of philosophical understanding of the Supreme, Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The other is that of direct engagement in the transcendental loving devotional service of the Lord. Of these two most popular methods, the path of devotional service is recommended here as the best, because one on the path of devotional service does not have to wait for the attainment of the fruitive results of pious activities or for the results of knowledge. The two stages of executing devotional service are, first, the stage of practicing devotional service with our present senses under the regulations of the recognized scriptures, and second, attaining sincere attachment for serving the particles of the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord. The first stage is called sadhana bhakti, or devotional service for the neophyte, which is rendered under the direction of a pure devotee, and the second stage is called raga bhakti, in which the mature devotee automatically takes to the various service of the Lord out of sincere attachment. The great sage Maitreya now gives the final answer to all the questions of Vidura. Devotional service to the Lord is the ultimate means to mitigate all the miserable conditions of material existence. The path of knowledge, or that of mystic gymnastics, may be adopted as a means for the purpose, but unless mixed with bhakti or devotional service, they are unable to award the desired result. By practicing sadhana bhakti, one may gradually rise to the point of raga bhakti, and by performing raga bhakti in loving transcendental service, one can even control the Supreme Powerful Lord. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutare Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschitya Dashitarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhyevacha patitanam pavanabhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So it is a very beautiful, you can say, poetic verse, and at the same time it is very encouraging verse. One of those that sometimes, beginning devotees like me, myself, we really need to get reminded that we are so lucky that we came to the path of bhakti, and why bhakti is really the best possible way of attaining Supreme. And so this chapter is basically, this particular verse is the ultimate answer of Maitreya to the questions that Vidura asked him. And so he's telling him here that simply by hearing about transcendental activities and forms of the Lord, we can get rid of all the miseries. And the question can be asked, why are we miserable? We know that miseries or happiness, they're all results of our activities. We do certain things because we have certain desires, and then we get certain results. And sometimes they're good results, and sometimes they're miserable results, And problem is that every living entity, we have our minute independence. Just like Krishna has all the qualities, so we being a little part and parcel of Lord, we also have those qualities present in a very little amount. And so we have this limited free will that we can use to decide if we want to be with Krishna or if we want to enjoy without him. And when we make that decision, we get under, this is why it says that living entity is basically a marginal energy of the Lord, because we can either be connected with Krishna and be under influence of his internal energy, or if we choose the otherwise, then we become influenced by his external energy. And so in this way, living entity, if he chooses to misuse his free will, then under influence of false ego, thinking that I'm enjoyer and I'm the controller, we go about our life, and we make decisions, we make activities, and then we bear a fruit, certain reactions. Because along the way, sometimes we happen to hurt other people, and because we are basically thinking that we're enjoying controller, then oftentimes our activities, they are immoral. Or very easily we do something which is not good. And so, in this way, like it was mentioned in previous verses, we live this life like a dream. We think that what we have at the moment is real. But actually we know that even this body constantly changing. Every cell of our body is constantly changing, so we can't really say that this body exists because it's constantly changing. And unfortunately, we don't remember. The soul, the spirit soul, is actually full of bliss and knowledge, but because we came into contact with matter, under influence of material ego, then we forget about our position, we forget our knowledge. And this been also explained in previous verses by Maitreya Muni. He uses example of the moon, that reflection of moon in the water quivers because it's in a contact with water. So in the same way we forget, and we live this life like it's a real thing, but actually so many times we already had our partners and our children and our positions and our different genders and position, different lifetimes. And the example that Maitreya Muni using, he says that it's like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. That's in previous verses. He's using that example. And it's interesting because if our head is cut off, we can't really see it, can we? So, so we think that our dream is our real life, but actually it is not. And so in this way, we have certain desires. We're trying to aspire for something we think is going to make us happy, and we're trying to avoid something that we think is dangerous for us or not going to make us happy. And so we get good and bad results. And so in order to avoid miseries, there are different ways that people deal with it. One of the ways is karma kanda, when we know that Shastra gives all these different rituals and different instructions of how we should perform only good activities, and in this way we don't have simple activities, and then we can just enjoy, and it is very attractive for many people just to live in harmony and be happy right now, right here, have a good health, good wife, good wealth, and and potentially have a better life next life, go to heavenly planets with demigods. But there is a problem with that, because it's a very dangerous path, actually. And we know the story of King Nriga from Krishna book, that Krishna's sons, they went for a picnic, and they discovered an animal in a well, a lizard that was stuck in there. And then they came to Krishna. Naturally, they feel sorry for the creature, so they came to Krishna and they asked him, can you come and help, to get him out, because we tried and we couldn't. And so when Krishna liberated that living entity, so then he tells the story that he was a King Nriga who was, following all the Vedic injunctions and doing the right thing. And, the kings, they had all this wealth. And the wealth of the kings back then, they needed it to do the sacrifices, to give charity to Brahmins. That's what they used it for. And so at some point he gave the big, he donated lots of cows to a Brahmana. And then one of those cows accidentally wandered off and joined the other flock of cows. And then he gifted those cows to another Brahmana. And then the first Brahmana, he was like, wait a second, that's my cow, And so they came, they started arguing, they came to the king, and king was trying all he could, He was like, I give you 10,000 other cows, each of you, it's just an accident, the cow is just an animal, it wandered off, But they wouldn't budge, they were really offended, and he got cursed. And so he became a lizard. So we can see that, yes, he was trying his best. And if we read Mahabharata, we can see that every time the certain situation comes, and there is like so much processing, involved, how to make a decision, what is the right thing to do here, because it's this point and there's that, and you have to be very careful. And then it all can be lost, just like that when cow wandered away. And so that's karma kanda. Although unfortunately it is very attractive, and we can see that sometimes even devotees, we get very comfortable and we like to be in Krishna consciousness because we want to be, just comfortable in our life. We don't want to be pushed out of comfort zone. We just want to be, we know that we shouldn't eat animals and all the good things that we should do, shouldn't do. But the problem with this is that eventually, as more people follow this, they realize that that door that they're trying to knock into, it's always closed. You can't be happy in the material world. Even if you become a demigod, at some point, you're going to have to die, and it's described how when they go to heavenly planets, they have this beautiful garland that they wear, and as the limit of their pious activities running out, that garland starts to wane, And they start to feel like, oh, I'm going to have to go back to material world soon. And they start to feel a bit sad about that. And as soon as they feel that, they're kind of destroying the whole atmosphere there, and so they get kicked out. And so we know that there is no gain, basically. It's just like going in circles, doing the same thing. So eventually these people, they get frustrated, been trying to, because Krishna say, everyone follows my way, ultimately. So eventually people get disappointed because they keep putting so much effort and it's just so not rewarding enough. And so then they reject relationships and they want to do jnana yoga. They want to seize the activity, and they say that, okay, they wanted to become liberated from the miseries of material world, not trying to do my fruitive activities anymore. And so they come to this jnana yoga that was mentioned in here. But their way of avoiding sinful activities there is just to cease any action, instead of trying to aspire for good activities. Now we just don't do anything. I'll just sit and I'll be speculating. But the problem here is that it is very difficult to perform because it's a very unnatural thing to do. Just to imagine, we're trying to chant our rounds every day, and we know how difficult it is to control the mind, to control our senses. And so, yes, they sit there, and first of the thing that if you just sit, it doesn't mean that you're not making any activity. You're still sitting, you're still breathing, you still have to maintain your body, and every time we might just sit on someone we don't see. So you still gain some sort of karma for this. And on top of everything, when we speculate, we're trying to understand nature of this world, we're trying to understand Supreme, and these things actually beyond our senses. So trying to use our speculative mind and our power of our brain to understand something which is beyond is not actually going to work. So that's why in jnana yoga, and same as with just the yogic activities, unless we actually engage in devotional service, they can't get the results, just like Srila Prabhupada mentions here. Because, and that's why what they do, sometimes they worship some deity or Vishnu, that they do it just to gain their, liberation, and then as they gain the results, they reject that. But unless they do some sort of form of devotional service, they cannot surpass the material nature, because we know from Bhagavad Gita that verse, Prakriti Kriyamanani Gune Karmani Sarvashaha, where Krishna says that the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself to be a doer, but actually everything is carried out by modes of material nature. And that energy of Krishna is very difficult to overcome, because it's perfect, just as Krishna is perfect. So all his energies are also perfect. And they're perfect in a way that they serve perfectly the goal, that they've been created for. And so unless someone engages in devotional service, even in jnana yoga, they can't get the results. And then we know all these stories about mystic yogis, such as Vishwamitra, for example, who would be standing there on one leg or doing their austerities and completely stop their activities, and they're holding their senses and they meditate. And then Indra occasionally gets very scared that they're actually trying to get his position, so he will send his pretty apsaras down, and we know what happens, because it's very difficult, because what happens, it doesn't actually deal with the core problem. And so, yes, so that's why Srila Prabhupada here, he is talking about bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga to be free from miserable conditions. Because bhakti avoids karma and jnana, and is a just more simple and direct method. And when we look at, if we look in Nectar of Devotion, which describes the process of bhakti, and it's one of those very important books for us to read, because it gives you all the details about devotional service, how it's performed. And so in the first chapter, it has 6 characteristics of devotional service. And one of the first ones is relief from material distress. And it actually referred to oftentimes as just as a side effect of bhakti. So it's really because that it happens straight away as you just only practicing sadhana bhakti. Just like it says in this verse, what to speak of those who actually have attraction for the lotus feet. People who don't even have attraction, like me, for example, But even on our level, on the very beginning level, straight away the side effect of bhakti is that's the relief of material distress. Because as we discussed before, the cessation of activities is not going to fix the core problem, because the core problem of being enjoyer and controller, when we misuse our free will, that is why we end up doing some sinful activities or pious activities and be bounded by them. So, in Krishna consciousness, instead of trying to control, just to seize any activity of our senses, we engage our senses in devotional service. And in this way, we link them to Krishna. And there's so many examples to that, that we don't need to stop what we're doing. It's very easy in that way. We just have to add Krishna to everything that we do. That's why devotional service is so practical. Because we don't have to tell people you have to drop everything you do, drop your career, drop, your families, just reject, you have to renounce what you're doing. No, you don't have to renounce, you just have to add Krishna to it. And it's interesting thing happen when we engage our senses, when we sing for Krishna, when we cook for Krishna, when we eat prasad, we talk about Krishna. Or, for example, when we dress deities, sometimes I can say that when I dress Krishna Balaram, they look particularly beautiful to me that day. And I start to think that, I have a special relationship with these particular deities, but sometimes it is not necessarily straight away a spiritual feeling, because we know that every time we get in touch with something, we kind of expand our ego in it. Like we have our own car, and if somebody hit your car, you get very upset because nobody hit you, it's just a car, but you can't expand your ego on it. So sometimes it feels like a similar thing may happen with deities, because only on days when I dress them, I feel that they're particularly beautiful, and I like these particular deities because I'm dressing them. So it's kind of like expanding your ego on it, but it doesn't matter, And sometimes we think, how would I know if it's a spiritual feeling of real relationship there, or is it just my but it doesn't matter, because the main point here is that you linked your senses to Krishna. And then I remember at some point after, I've been dressing deities for a while, and then we went to Vrindavan, and I always had that thing for Radha Shyama Sundara, they were my favorite deities. And then all of a sudden I go to Vrindavan, and then I see Krishna Balaram, and I feel completely different. I feel like, I actually, really like Krishna Balaram now too. So then it does work on all levels. So, and in this way, through our senses, we get our mind attached to Krishna. And then, yes, and then also what happens is that by chanting, by hearing about Krishna, we burn a lot of our past sinful activities. We know that Prabhupada was saying every time we clap our hands during kirtan, the line on our hands get changed. So we burn so much sinful activities from our past lives. And sometimes we don't notice that, because it's like sitting in a plane. You've traveled somewhere for 15 hours and you sit there and everything looks the same. You look out the window, you can't really see much, it's just clouds there. And you're sitting for 15 hours the way you've been sitting 4 hours ago. So it feels like nothing is changing, but actually you're traveling with a very high speed. And we can see that, how we've been talking about mystic yogis who've been trying to restrain their senses. And then we have Haridas Thakur, similar example, when he was chanting his japa, and then I think it was a mayor of the city or someone sent a lady there to distract him. And she came there, and he was actually quite nice to her. He told her, you just wait, because I just need to finish my rounds. He wasn't like shushing her or anything rude to her. He just said, you just wait. And he was just chanting his rounds, and 3 days she was coming to him like that. And not that he didn't lose control of his senses. It didn't disturb him in any way, but he also made her devotee. So we can see that huge difference here. And this is what Prabhupada did with us, when he came to the West, and he had all these hippies, who already neglected all the moral codes of back then society, they just been doing whatever felt good, And then Srila Prabhupada came, and he gave them, this process by engaging their senses, and easily they were able to give up all the bad habits. So how is the bhakti saves us from misery? Like, if we talk about this technically, how does the process work? We know that Arjuna is asking Krishna a question in Bhagavad Gita, and he says, what is that force that make us act against our will? Because we know lots of things, we hear, and we shouldn't scream at our children when they're naughty. We should be patient, we shouldn't eat white sugar, we know all these things, but then something always make us act against our will. So Arjuna is asking Krishna that question. And so Krishna replies that it's lust. And then that's the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And then he explains that lust present in our intelligence, in our senses, and in our mind. In all 3 places lust resides. And so where should we attack it first? So Krishna explains it in Bhagavad Gita. He says that if your mind is strong, then the senses would follow. But unless you take your senses under control, they're going to constantly agitate your mind, and that mind cannot be in peace. So that's why Krishna recommends you have to attack lust in your senses. We start with senses. And at the same time, we use our intelligence to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. So how do we fix our intelligence in Krishna consciousness? We have to read Prabhupada books. We preach. Preaching is very important, because it's one thing when you just read, but you always read completely differently when you have to repeat it, Then you start to actually read, and you have all the questions there, because you have to repeat, or if someone asks me a question. So we have to preach, we have to chant our rounds, we associate with devotees, and in this way we make our intelligence strong. And then when you have your intelligence fixed in Krishna consciousness, that makes our mind strong, and mind become attached to Krishna, like we've been discussing, by addressing deities or doing certain things. Then eventually our mind becomes our friend, because at this particular moment in time, speaking of myself, my mind is not my friend. He's always trying to delude me and take me somewhere else. But the more we practice, mind become attached to Krishna. And so in this way, mind attached to Krishna, senses fixed in our vows, and with intelligence fixed in Krishna consciousness, we can conquer the lust. So all these 3 things are actually very important, all 3 of them. Because sometimes we see how people decide to be vegetarians. I had a few talks like that. You meet people and you say, oh, I'm vegetarian. They're like, oh, I've tried this before, I lasted this many years, but then... Because what happens, they have strong intelligence that will tell their mind, oh, we shouldn't eat this because this and that. And they control their senses, but they haven't got their mind attached to Krishna. And so eventually that fails, Or we have situations, I remember Mukunda Maharaj was talking about it, how sometimes devotees leave the movement because they control their senses, they do the service, they get some, taste, but they don't read enough Prabhupada books, so their intelligence is weak, and then they leave, Or in the same way as we were talking about Jnana Yoga in this verse, that's what they do. They control their senses, they have strong intelligence, and they can even achieve the liberation, but because there is no attachment to Krishna there, eventually they fall down, because it's just boring, there's no relationships. So all 3 things are very important here. And when we talk about practicing like this, how Srila Prabhupada was talking about sadhana bhakti, it has to be performed under guidance of your spiritual master. It is very important because the spiritual master knows the nature of a disciple. And so he knows how to best engage our senses, our nature. And when we fixed in instruction of the spiritual master, that's Vyavasayatmika Buddhi that Krishna talks about, I think in the 2nd chapter, I'm not sure. But yes, that's the fixedness in vows and instructions of your spiritual master. And in this way, our heart get purified, our desires start to change. We start to understand that, no, I'm not actually enjoying controller. And yes, I remember Mukunda Maharaj also saying the story how in the earlier days when they were traveling and they got to the church, I can't remember exact details of the story, but the point was that the priest that was there wanted to have a private conversation with devotees. And then he called them and he said he wanted to give them some donation. He got the envelope with the money in it because he said that I sit here and every time people come and they attain for their sinful activities, they come and say, oh, I did this, I've been drinking, I've been, indulging in this and that. Please forgive me. And he's like, and we forgive them. And then they come back next week again, And so after some time, he started feeling that the process doesn't really work, And that's why he was so inspired by devotees, because he was asking them questions. How's your process work? How do you guys just give up all this nonsense, However, when we talk about all this, at the same time, we can say that being devotees, we still suffer, isn't it? We're still feeling that, we're talking about this, but why do we still feel all the problems happening around us? And it's really difficult sometimes. And the example is given of a spinning fan. Sometimes when you switch off the fan, it still keeps spinning. So we have certain sinful activities that already been manifested, That would be particular body we have, where we were born, our education, or our economic position, or all these things already been manifested. So, but the point is, when we become devotees, everything become in a positive way. Yes, we still have to go through certain karma, because that ultimately makes us better. We have to purify ourselves. But the point here is that being devotees, we see everything connected to Krishna. Sometimes devotees say, okay, there is my spiritual life and there is my work. Those are two different things, but actually it's not different things. For devotee, everything is connected to Krishna. Everything that happens to him in work is also directly connected to Krishna. And in this way, we kind of treat our life like, okay, we're here in a hospital, we have to go through maybe surgery to feel better later. And it's a very positive process. And so, yes, we do suffer. It's difficult when our relatives die, or something happens, or we lose money, or, we get sick. But at the same time, we always feel protected and connected to Krishna. We have this feeling of trust to him. We know that he's our best friend, and that he's not going to give us something that is going to be harmful to our spiritual life. That everything that Krishna gives is ultimately beneficial for us. And one way of thinking of it is that we always think that I was meant to lose an arm, but I only lost a finger. And also, devotees, they tend to use their difficulties to get closer to Krishna. And the perfect example here would be Pandavas. They went through so much when you look at their life, but at the end of it, Queen Kunti, she was actually praying to Krishna, saying that, please give us more, because that makes us closer to you. Because every time the difficulty comes, then they surrender to Krishna and they meet him in the end there. And that's all that matters. And then if you ask devotee, would you rather not have your miseries, or have your miseries and meet Krishna in the end? Then most of the time, I'd much rather have my difficult time and meet Krishna in the end than not have it. So this is the beauty of devotional service. And we have this interesting also example of Ambarish Maharaj, coming back to Maharaj, King Nriga, that his cow just wandered away and he got such a heavy punishment for it. And then we have Ambarish Maharaj, who was, he drank water, and Durvasa Muni got really offended. And, and we know how that went, because Krishna straight away protected him there. He was like, Durvasa Muni was running away. So being devotees, we always feel protected by Krishna. And what's to speak of those who are attached to Krishna? Even us on our beginning level, we already feel protected, we feel connected to Krishna, we feel how he manifests in our life in different ways. But if we think of someone who is out there on a Raganuga Bhakti, so we have sadhana, when we just practice because spiritual master told us to do certain things and we don't want to do it, we don't feel like it. Sometimes we don't even understand why we have to do something. Like, I know some of the instructions that have been given to me, I couldn't understand how and why. But you do it because, yeah, that's a sadhana bhakti. But then when you get to Raganuga Bhakti, after you go through Anartha Nivritti and that process, then you actually have that spontaneous attraction to a particular service you like to do. And you can't not to do it, And you see our spiritual master who are traveling around the world, and sometimes their health is really like falling apart. They like really only just surviving, but they just wouldn't stop. They go and they travel and they give classes day after day because that's their spontaneous love for Krishna. They can't stop doing it. That's their service. And so, to summarize everything that we were talking about today, there is a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, chapter 31. There's two verses, verse 19 and verse 20, which basically describes the ways how we can make Krishna pleased. Because ultimately, in a way, we're also speculating. We're talking about jnanis who sit there and speculate with their own mind. But being devotees, we read Bhagavatam and we have our talks and, we just have discussion. But the principle here that we do it as an offering for Krishna, of our efforts, trying to understand what Prabhupada was saying, trying to read. And then by doing sadhana bhakti, Krishna becomes pleased, and then he gives us the knowledge. That's the process, the humble process, through the disciplic succession. And so how do we please the Krishna to get his mercy? So there's these two verses. By showing mercy to all living entities, being satisfied somehow or other, and restricting the senses from sense enjoyment, one can very quickly satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead Janardana. Yeah, so we're talking about these things these three things we were discussing before. Showing mercy to other living entities is a preaching, or making our intelligence stronger. And preaching is actually one of those tips, how we talk usually, that there is a recipe how to make Indian dish, but then there is a tip, like a little thing. So preaching is one of those things that very quickly we can gain mercy of Krishna, because he gets very pleased when we're trying to preach to others, because we pleasing Srila Prabhupada when we do it. And another thing that I actually forgot to mention when I was talking about practicing sadhana bhakti under guidance of spiritual master, it is a very important point, because we can try really hard to please Krishna, but the reality is that our motivations are not pure yet. When we do our service, oftentimes we do it because we know it will be good for us. We know that we have to follow instructions of spiritual master because it's good for me. So it's natural, on our level, but it's not a pure bhakti, because pure bhakti meant to be only for Krishna. So in this way, our devotional service, yes, we can please Krishna with it, we try, but really, when we please our spiritual master, this is the most fast and easiest way to do it, because pure devotees, their heart is very soft and they're very grateful, and sometimes we do something very little and they're so compassionate, they know what it's like, how it's difficult sometimes to be devotee. And so when we do something little for them, they become so pleased and they're really encouraging for us. And when our spiritual master or our Shiksha Guru, or devotees, when they pleased, that's when Krishna become pleased. So it's really a shortcut. We don't have to strike so much. Please Krishna is so difficult. But then we have Srimati Radharani, we have Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, who are much more kind, and then we have devotees and your spiritual master. So that's one thing. And then we're talking here about restricting your senses. Yes. And yes. So in this way, we can quickly satisfy Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the second verse talking about being completely cleansed of all material desires, the devotees are freed from all material contamination. Thus, they can always think of the Lord constantly and address him very feelingly. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, knowing himself to be controlled by his devotees, does not leave them for a second, just as the sky overhead never becomes invisible. So this second verse is more referring to Raga Bhakti here. So as a result, when we get purified of all these material desires, and that's what Prabhupada said in a verse that we were reading today in the very end. He says that when devotee performing this Raga Bhakti, he can actually control the Supreme Lord. So this is the result we get, that we constantly think of the Lord and we address him very feelingly, because when we talk about chanting holy name, there is a difference in chanting, so the more feelingly we address Krishna, the more he actually responds. So this is all I was going to say today. Just this is why process of bhakti is so much better, easily and happier performed. So if there's any questions or comments.
Any questions?
Great class.
Say something. I have a question.
John.
You mentioned Ambarish Maharaj. So I remember I was taking some senior devotees to the airport. It was a very short interval of breaking the Ekadashi. Like a few minutes, sometimes it comes like that. And I even probably, had an alarm clock and just started fumbling in my pockets for some grains. And that person said, "Oh, you're a smarta Brahmana." So kind of a little bit deriding me on being so staunch and following the regulative principles. So my question is, sometimes we can see that devotees, when they become devotees, they start strictly following Ekadasi, like breaking, fasting on without water, even. And then I'm speaking about myself, practically slack, so I'm not following that way any longer. So where is that fine line between following following strictly regulated principles and kind of more focusing on Krishna? So Maharaj Ambarish, he could have easily just wait till Durvasa Muni eats first. But he was trying to balance between following the Kadashi rules and not offending the guest. So he just sipped some water, and that was the cause of that incident. So he could have just waited. Okay, all right. Well, because the guest is even more important than when you worship the deities at home and someone comes up, you just need to pause worshiping the deities and welcome the guests. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's, again, it's not something, that's what we were talking about a bit, that sometimes it's really hard to know what is the right thing to do, because you have to take into account so many things, and this, it's like to find this balance of truth, how to say, and about the fasting and everything. I remember one time my Guru Maharaj was talking about it, and he was saying that just the following 4 regulative principles and not eating meat and doing just the basic things is already so austere. Because if we think about it, always when you go to shops, you have to check all the ingredients. You can't just go to McDonald's and buy your food when you're tired. When you have family, sometimes I just look at people and you have to take your deities with you wherever you go. You have to have your showers every day and do all these things. It's already quite intense. And that's why Guru Maharaj was saying that if you just follow that, that is already enough, you know. That's why Prabhupada gave us this bare minimum. But I kind of feel like with these things, oftentimes it is important to ask your spiritual master or someone senior, because everyone is different. We have different levels and different, capacity to surrender, basically. Yes, so, but maybe Ramai Swami could add something to that question.
Well, I think the basic principle is that, as you said correctly, that there are, you know, when one gets initiated, then there are compulsory vows that, you know, chanting of 16 rounds and the regulated principles, and they have to be followed. Everything else is extra. And so how much you do follow everything else, one rule is that, are you remembering Krishna more by these things, or are you remembering Krishna less by these things? So you have to be thinking about that. If I'm doing these extra things, and they're certainly extra, I mean, there's so many regulations to be followed. You mentioned that taking the grains at a certain time and all this type of thing. So one can do, and you know, there's even that we know about, there's so many more extra as well. So how much do you want to do, and what is the priority? So, but the golden rule is, if your activities are increasing your Krishna consciousness, or your activities are decreasing and you're just concentrating on the ritualistic things, and you know, this comment about the smarta brahmana, a little bit maybe unkind comment, but it's generally just the karma kanda, all the rules and regulations that they don't consider the higher goal, and they're just caught up in the rituals. So if we just get caught up in the rituals and we forget about Krishna, that's decreasing, then that's too much attention to that type of thing. But as Mataji said then, you consult the senior devotees, and you consult, what do you think? What's your opinion? And so on. So you have to take advice about these things. And just like a doctor will give you a prescription, and then after some time they'll ask you, well, how's it going? Have you got any side? And then sometimes it has to be altered. You know, well, now I think you have to take a little bit less of this, and so on and so forth. So there's many different answers, but how you answered was very good.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. Thank you. Cheers.